course, the 41st Daddy Bush, if you will. Sometimes I refer to him as that. You would, of course, never refer to him as that in a short answer or an essay. It's just kind of what I call him because he is the Dad Bush. And we just finished Reagan. We talked about the 8 years, the 2 terms of the conservative revolution of Reagan. We've talked about Reaganomics. We've talked about a decrease in social programs. While that has helped government spending and decreased government spending, it has not always had positive effects on society. We've talked about Reagan's Cold War policies. We've talked about the fact that, of course, he had a little scandal in the Iran-Contra affair. Didn't really stick to him, though. Remember, Teflon president. Talked about the Marines in Lebanon, how that's a little bit of an issue. Mostly, we've talked about the fact that he is the president who is credited with ending the Cold War. Reagan was loved. Reagan had a revolution. He won both presidencies, presidential campaigns very easily. And, of course, when the next presidential campaign came up in 1988, because everybody loves Reagan, and he ended the Cold War, and he was friends with Gorbachev, and he signed INF because it went so well. When his vice president comes up for election, it is a pretty clear choice that they will elect George H.W. Bush. And in fact, the very first slide even says, passing the torch to H.W. Bush, Republican, 1988 to 1992. And if you know your math, that means you might want to write down he was only elected to how many terms? 1. Okay, so the very first thing we want to talk about is I have Reagan's successor. Okay, now Reagan's successor obviously was his vice president. Let me tell you, again, everything in red is important. The number one thing I would say is kept most of Reagan's domestic agenda, but added a few policies of his own. I will tell you that he keeps the war on drugs in particular. It's one of the things he kept, especially the war on drugs. The other thing that I would tell you is that Daddy Bush, BUSH41, H.W. Bush, Herbert Walker is what it stands for actually. Might be a good question. Herbert Walker Bush. Had a great foreign policy experience before becoming the president, which he needed actually to win the Gulf War. One of the easiest, most successful wars in American history, the Gulf War, Persian Gulf War. Operation Desert Storm is another thing we'll call it. His foreign policy experience, and that's your second thing you're getting down. Let me tell you about his foreign policy experience. Whoa. Did you just see what popped up? Former envoy to China, former director of the CIA, former UN ambassador. Y'all remember what UN stand for, right? United Nations, former League of Nations, but this time it's actually successful because we joined. Former 2-term vice president under Ronald Reagan. If you want to talk about a resume, you guys know what a resume is, right? It's like what you submit for a job application. Like, here's all the experience I have. If you look at those 4 things, and I want you to get each one of those 4 things down. Are we clear? They're not red, but they're important. We are talking about possibly one of the most experienced presidents in American history to run this country. But ironically, look at the years again, 88 to 92, only was elected to 1 term. I wonder why. We'll get to it in just a second. Now, I will tell you that the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to flip over this page, and we're going to talk about the Persian Gulf War. So we're actually starting with foreign policy today, okay? The Persian Gulf War, what you're looking at right here is a map of the Middle East. Something that we've become a little bit familiar with, especially with the Iran hostage crisis, the Marines in Lebanon under Reagan. We've talked a lot about the Camp David Accords under Carter, the Egypt and Israel. And the Persian Gulf War in 1991 was largely about Iraq and this itty-bitty little place called Kuwait. Say that word. Kuwait. Did you say it? I hope you said it. Iraq and Kuwait. Iraq's leader was named Saddam Hussein. Kuwait was a very oil-rich nation on the Persian Gulf that Saddam Hussein wanted access to. Now, here's what we're going to do. The first thing we're going to start. It says started in 1990. Persian Gulf War was between Iraq and Kuwait. Saddam Hussein started in 1990 because Saddam Hussein ordered an Iraqi invasion of oil-rich Kuwait. Because the fact is you see all these little itty-bitty oil fields right here. Guess what that really means? Little itty-bitty dollar signs, but I should say really, really big dollar signs as well. Pretty dang important. Okay, So in 1990, Saddam Hussein ordered an Iraqi invasion of oil-rich Kuwait. Well, guess what? We are not interested in seeing the oil get cut off. Remember the 1970s, the OPEC embargo, the Iranian Revolution? That cut our oil, increased our prices, increased a bad economy. So with that, we are going to have to step in. The U.S. also, and I want to make sure that we understand this as well, understarted in 1990. I want a bullet point. The U.S., because Iraq invaded Kuwait, we also have this little thing called a domino theory. We think if Kuwait falls, what's right next to it? Saudi Arabia, who was our ally and who very, very commonly exported oil to us. We thought if Kuwait falls, pretty soon Saudi Arabia falls. Remember, when one domino falls, they all fall. This time it's not about communism. It's more about losing what absolutely, positively, unbelievably, very valuable resource? Oil, petroleum. Okay? So the U.S. fears a subsequent invasion of ally Saudi Arabia. Now, the very, very last thing that I need you to make sure you know about the Persian Gulf War is the U.S. forgoed, just completely 100% skipped over an international coalition against Iraq. And what we did is we took and we imposed UN economic sanctions on Iraq. I need you to make sure you write this, okay? And I also need to make sure that you circle the word sanctions. This means basically, I need you to write this down, an embargo. And what does it mean if we embargo all trade? We stop all trade, which means they can't make any money. Now, this right here is going to be another war map of the Persian Gulf War in 1991. Now, in 1991, I've got the year right there, 1991. Go ahead and pause it and get this down. Okay, so in 1991, we have right here, Bush gained approval from Congress. Ooh, remember that little thing called the War Powers Act? That'd be a good quiz question there. War Powers Act. Bush gained approval from Congress to begin Operation Desert Storm. But this is where you absolutely, positively have to understand what happened. He literally entered Iraq, and with that, forces expelled Iraqi Saddam Hussein forces from Kuwait in 100 hours. So the last time we were in a war in Vietnam, we were stuck there years on end, yes? Bush not only gains approval through the War Powers Act, remember the 90 days and the president has to have approval? He gains approval in 1991. He begins Operation Desert Storm, and he expels all Iraqi forces from Kuwait in 100 hours. You want to know what we say about that? We say, Marca. The Persian Gulf War is going to be expensive, but it is going to be a massive success. We have the technology, we have the manpower, and we have the will. And so with that, George W. Bush outcome creates a new world order. Need to make sure you get that down in quotes. A new world order. That is his philosophy. Just as Reagan's philosophy was peace through strength, Carter's philosophy was human rights, Nixon's philosophy was détente. Did you like that review I just did? The U.S. success in Iraq led Bush to declare a new world order and saw his approval rating soar to 90%. This is amazing because we're talking about this man who got 90% approval ratings. However, he only had how many terms? One term. But Saddam had not been removed from power. His economic sanctions did little to weaken his rule, and American troops in Saudi Arabia led to an increased anti-American sentiment and the rise of a little thing called Al-Qaeda under Osama bin Laden, which we actually had learned about because he had been in Afghanistan and we aided him expel the USSR forces under Carter. So with the outcome of the Persian Gulf War, which is the only thing, I'm going to be honest with you, the only thing we need to know about President Daddy Bush's, BUSH41's foreign policy, is the fact that while this new world order was created and his approval ratings in America were great, Saddam Hussein had not been removed from Iraq, the economic sanctions did little, and American troops in Saudi Arabia did a lot to anger a lot of people in the Middle East, which may have contributed to terrorism afterwards. Now, from 1980 to 2000, the U.S. engaged in 17 distinct military operations in the Middle East. The reason I want us to make sure we star this and get this down is with more American involvement, you are going to see more backfire from the Middle East. You want to know where terrorism, where 9/11 comes from. Not only is it just coming from angry people who unfortunately enjoy innocence and their hurting those innocents. But also, as we become more engaged in the Middle East, we start to see more ramifications from that. Now, what we're doing, and by the way, at the very end of your foreign policy notes before I go on, I did note that in 1989 the Berlin Wall fell, and in 1991 the USSR was dissolved. We've talked about that before. It says Cold War ends. This happens under Daddy Bush, Bush 41, but I will tell you, who do we credit that for? Ronald Reagan. Although it happened under Bush. Now the last thing we need to do, flip it back over. Did you hear me flipping? And let's go ahead and get the election of 1992 down. How did Bush 41 lose his presidency with a 90% approval rating? Despite voter approval of his handling of Iraq, Bush's real problem was the economy. I need you to circle that, underline it. Bush's real problem was the economy. Now, there was a bullet point, massive federal deficit. Oh, whose name should you probably write out beside that? Reagan. Okay, Reagan took, and Reaganomics cut taxes by 20%, cut social programs, but increased military spendings with things like SDI. So with that, you're going to have deficits. That means debts. This leads to a 1989 recession as soon as Daddy Bush took office. Now, Bush cut the military spending, hoping to kind of even out the budget. But to do the impossible, which is fix these deficits that have been going on for quite a while, he had to break a 1988 campaign promise. And it says not to raise taxes. And it says right there in red, read my lips. Okay? With this is actually, real quickly, I want to kind of show this to you, okay? This is the campaign promise that George H.W. Bush makes when he is running for president. Let me let you watch this. You want to see that again?
Read my lips. No new taxes.
And by the way, that woman right there, the little elderly lady, okay, with the white hair, that is his wife, Barbara Bush. Man, you want to talk about an absolute fierce woman. That is her, okay? And so with this campaign promise of read my lips, no new taxes, becomes basically the thing that if he raises taxes, did he lie to the American people? And it's going to be a problem. Now, the next thing you needed to write was the Perot problem. Okay, the third party that split the Republicans and gave the elections to the Democrats. Let me show this political map to you. 1992. You'll notice right here it says Democratic, Clinton. We'll start talking about Bill Clinton in a little bit. Republican, George H.W. Herbert Walker Bush, blue. But you'll notice, look at this popular vote right here. There is not just red, there is not just blue, there is white. There is a reform candidate named Ross Perot, richer than anybody you have probably ever met, with bigger ears than him as well. He is going to run as a very far right part of the Republican Party. He is going to split the Republican Party. Are we clear right here? And I know this is opposite. Blue is supposed to be red. Red is supposed to be blue. He's going to split the Republican Party, and he is going to hand the Electoral College to Bill Clinton, William Jefferson Clinton, in 1992. It's a perfect example of how a third party can take and absolutely dominate. Clinton says a very, very simple thing. It's the economy, stupid. You said, read my lips, no new taxes. Then this guy named Ross, what was his name? Perot, runs, splits the Republican Party, and you have an absolute positive mess. Now, with that, Clinton wins. Why? Because I'll be really honest with you. Perot splits the Republican Party, and Daddy Bush went back on his promise not to raise taxes. I think it was actually probably a smart idea. They can't keep going into debt. However, politics is politics. Now, conclusions, real quickly, 1 minute. Since this, Reagan was the first Republican to serve 2 full terms in president since Eisenhower. Reagan's supporter claimed that he'd restored the economy, military, patriotism, family values, and America's place in the world. Reagan's not supporters, detractors, claimed he removed social safety nets, skirted Congress and foreign policy, and tripled the national debt. I don't know. Long story short, 1980 to 1992 was a Republican revolution. Reagan and Bush 41 together. Bush 41 did not win because of the fact that not only was there a third-party candidate in Perot, but also because he made a very, very big mistake when he said, read my lips, no new taxes. And when you're in debt, guess what you have to do? Raise taxes. Tune in next time.